Howdy, it's Uncle Paul, and I am going to be reading Chapter 3 from my book, Bears Don't Eat Fat People, self-published in 2003, and it's under the category of creative nonfiction. Okay, here we go. Chapter 3, it is entitled, The Preparation. And this is the illustration my dad drew for it, right there. Okay. For any adventure to be successful, there would have to be much preparation. In anticipation of my spring adventure, I spent time preparing body and spirit. For the body, diet and exercise. For the spirit, more Bible study and prayer. Shedding a few pounds by spring would be helpful because hiking and setting up camp are physically taxing. Although losing too much weight would be detrimental to the premise of my hypothesis, there was no real danger of losing enough to no longer be considered fat. Wonderfully tasting food would be downgraded from my regular meal menu, and fruit and vegetables would be upgraded. For the first time, I was happy that obesity's number one friend, or enemy, depending on your point of view, was non-existent in Du Bois. In an effort to maintain the rustic small-town atmosphere, the establishment of commercial business chains was discouraged, especially fast food restaurants. Most in my generation grew up with one on every corner. Why are fast food restaurants the friend of fat people? The drive-through window, of course. Oh, the genius of the drive-through window. From the haven of one's vehicle, provisions may be swiftly procured and then devoured anywhere. The drive-through window was not invented due to the fast food industry's insight on the psyche of fatties not wanting to be seen in public. Instead, I believe it was born out of necessity due to their woeful ignorance of seating. What greasy cook shack with any business sense would alienate their best customers by not providing the proper seating that would allow for the quick, comfortable consumption of vast quantities of their product over and over again. Yet most have done just that by constructing cramped booths and welded the chairs to the tables. Eating in such quarters is difficult when your belly is resting on half the table. Once this blunder was realized, holes were cut into walls for windows, allowing easy access for the gargantuan gormandizers. History was made. There are some rules for the use of the drive-through window. Number 1, never order from one window the amount of food you can really eat. Order an amount of food that would satisfy a normal person. Do this at several fast food joints, accumulating the desired amount of food in stages. Instead of thinking you are a gluttonous pig, the restaurant employees will think, "How did he get so fat by eating such a normal amount of food?" Or, "He's already fat, but at least he's not eating like a pig now." If two of the fast food eateries are next door to one another, circle the block at least once before driving through the second one. Anyone that might have seen you at the first restaurant will likely have forgotten when you drive through the second one. Number 2, if you are sent to one restaurant to get food for a group of people, order several drinks even if nobody in the group wanted them. If you don't order a drink, or order just one drink, the restaurant employees will assume you are going to eat all the food yourself. Of course, I actually could. Also, when ordering, make it obvious you are referring to a list on a piece of paper. When they ask, "Do you want mustard or ketchup with that?" look at the paper carefully and respond, "I don't know, she didn't say." It is then clear that you are getting food for others. Number 3, make sure you have plenty of money. Yes, anyone should have enough money to pay his bill, but fat people have the additional obstacle of no man's land. In a vehicle, no man's land is the driver's side floorboard. All dropped items reaching that zone are unattainable and out of play, at least until one is able to get out of the car and launch a search. Any search taking place while one is behind the wheel is futile, dangerous, and therefore ill-advised. What a blessing that the nearest fast food friends where I could put these rules to use were more than 70 miles away. Daily exercise, as much as I dreaded it, was a must. When you are my size, showering, dressing, sitting down, standing up are all tasks that affect the cardiovascular system and may therefore be considered exercise. They are activities, I admit, that merely maintain my considerable figure. Additional exertion was needed in order to actually start losing the pounds, and walking was the answer. The town cemetery would fit the walking requirements perfectly. It was secluded at the top of a hill with only one road passing nearby. Another road circled the boundary of the cemetery, which I would use as a track for walking. My favorite time to walk was sunrise. Yes, fewer people would be driving by at such an early hour, but I preferred it mostly because of the wonderful view. Illuminated by the varying colors of the morning sun, deep purple, red, neon pink, and then orange, the mountains presented a magnificence that reached well beyond their normal majesty. The cemetery overlooks the town, which lies in the Wind River Valley, an area not much larger than what we Texans call a gully wash. The surrounding mountains rise from the valley in layers. Scraggly hills of rock, sand, and scrub bushes make up the first layer. The second is covered with grass that is plush and green half the year. It is topped with a dense forest of mostly evergreen trees. The overall picture reminds me of a big belly growing out of the earth, each layer a layer of fat with stretch marks, blemishes, and hair. The topography changed dramatically just a few miles west of town. The mountains were thick with trees, and it was in those woods where my adventure would unfold. In my effort to prepare spiritually, I started an in-depth Bible study beginning with one word: glutton. The word was no stranger to me or to any fat people who made themselves at home at the all-you-can-eat bar. Glutton has been used as a synonym for fat and lazy, which is something I'd accepted. However insulting the word was, I never questioned its accuracy when applied to me, but I had never truly studied the word. In the many English dictionaries I consulted, the primary definition for glutton was something like a greedy eater, a person who eats too much. Out of all the different Bible translations I consulted, the word glutton is used only 5 times in the Scriptures. Twice in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 21:18-21, Proverbs 23:19-21, and 3 times in the New Testament, Matthew 11:19, Luke 7:34, Titus 1 and verse 12. In the Deuteronomy passage, gluttony goes hand in hand with a stubborn and rebellious attitude. The Mosaic law dictated whoever was guilty of such an attitude and did not repent and change could be stoned to death. Thankfully, mankind is no longer under the laws of the Old Testament, or I wouldn't have lived to see the 5th grade. The proverb says, "Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix with wine-bibbers or the gluttonous eaters of meat. For the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags." Proverbs 23:19-21. Not only is it unwise to be a glutton, but also to hang out with one. In other words, gluttony is contagious. It is a corrupting influence that leads to laziness and impoverishment. In the gospel accounts of Matthew and Luke, Jesus was accused of being a glutton, disclosing the idea of gluttony as a negative characteristic. This charge against Christ was false. Being God in the flesh, Jesus was without sin, Hebrews 4:15. Finally, the passage from the book of Titus is very interesting. The Apostle Paul placed the evangelist Titus on the island of Crete to assist the Lord's church. He was to set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city, Titus 1:5. Setting things in order would not be easy because of the deplorable condition of the society. Paul described the magnitude of the problem by quoting a Crete philosopher who said, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons," Titus 1:12. The King James Version, in place of lazy gluttons, has slow bellies. My brother asked his 4-year-old son, "Do you remember Uncle Paul?" He replied, "Yes, he has a big belly and can't run fast." It was confirmed. I was definitely a slow belly, and according to the Bible, was in the same boat with liars and evil beasts, all worthy of rebuke. The Bible didn't just teach me that I was a glutton, but also what I needed to do to resolve the problem. 2 major principles were involved: sacrifice and self-control. Jesus said, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Matthew 16:24 and 25. My aspiration to be a faithful Christian meant I had to deny myself desires that hampered my service to God. A few hundred extra pounds was proof that self-denial was at the very least a low priority, if not actually non-existent in my life. Using a physical race as an analogy for the spiritual race, the Apostle Paul said, "Do you not know that all of those who run in a stadium indeed run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a manner that you might win. Everyone who competes exercises self-control in all things. They indeed do it to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable. I do not run as without an aim. I box, but not as beating the air. I buffet and enslave my body so that I might not be rejected after I have preached to others." 1 Corinthians 9:24-27. How could I preach to others about self-control if I had none myself? How could I preach the Bible message of not drinking, smoking, gambling, fornicating, etc., from a body that had long been in neglect? As my Bible study progressed, my prayers became much more fervent and numerous. A camping and hiking adventure would obviously require camping and hiking equipment. I had none, and my search through local shops and on the internet revealed just how expensive my camping adventure was going to be. Granted, I had no need for the fancy blow-up portable outhouse, nor the plush cooking set complete with fold-up kitchen cabinets. However, the basic essentials were still beyond my preacher's budget. Begging and borrowing from friends was my only hope. Spring was approaching, so I made a list of needed equipment and paid a visit to my friends Robin and Kate Wiltshire. The Wiltshires owned a large ranch a few miles west of Du Bois, but it wasn't a typical one. They were in the business of training horses and other large animals for movies, television shows, commercials, and magazine ads. Watching Robin train a horse was a sight to behold. In a short time, he would have it bowing, jumping, rolling over, and even kicking a football on command. Their line of work was certainly fascinating, but no more than their past. Though both were from Australia, Robin and Kate met for the first time in Du Bois. Robin left his family ranch, or station as they are called in Australia, at the age of 13 to apprentice as a farrier for a racetrack. By the age of 15, he was riding as a professional on the rodeo circuit. While on the circuit, Robin was dismayed by the cruel methods men used to get horses to comply with their demands. Believing that abuse was unnecessary, he developed a skill for getting what he wanted from an animal with the most gentle and humane techniques. He eventually produced a show that not only exhibited his philosophy of training, but the fact that he had a marvelous gift. Not everyone could do with animals what Robin could. The show was a big hit, and Robin Wiltshire became well known in the rodeo business. It was the rodeo that brought him to the United States. He directed the rodeo in Jackson, Wyoming, but continued to perform his show with the animals. In time, Robin moved to Du Bois, 80 miles from Jackson, and began his career in advertising and movies. I met Robin when he and a close friend, Tom, also from Australia, began attending Sunday morning worship. Their rough hands and weathered faces were a testimony to their hard work. They were real cowboys. My customary insecurities caused me to wonder what these hard-working men thought about the fat preacher? Would they look at my soft hands and the generous cut of my jib with contempt? Their rugged exterior fed my stereotypical thinking, but their kind demeanor quickly set me straight. Being set straight often happened when it came to my preconceived ideas about cowboys. I thought they would be my harshest judges, but time and again they proved to be the most accepting. My first opportunity to meet Kate didn't come for several months after meeting Robin. Like Robin, she grew up on a station in Australia. While still a young girl, Kate was sent to a boarding school in Melbourne, where she spent 6 years. The big city fascinated her, and through the experience, the seed of curiosity and adventure had been planted. At the age of 20, she quit her job as a wool broker, bought a car, and set out on a trip to explore her homeland. The adventure took a year, and she paid expenses by working odd jobs along the way. Afterward, Kate settled down and took a job advertising. Within a few years, she got bored, and the seed of adventure sprouted again. The goal this time was to see the world, and Kate started with Canada. Next on the list was the United States. Since she had a friend in Jackson, Wyoming, it became her destination. The friend suggested that Kate stop in Du Bois and visit a friend by the name of Robin. Getting to Du Bois wasn't an easy task. The nearest bus stop was in Shoshone, over 80 miles to the east. Kate hitched a ride in a truck with 2 quite large dairy girls. On arriving in Du Bois, she rented a room at the Stagecoach Inn. That night, she met the friend of her friend in the Rustic Pine restaurant and bar, where he and the film crew were relaxing after a day of shooting a commercial for Wells Fargo Bank. Years ago, before leaving Australia, Kate's brother told her, "Whatever you do, don't fall in love with a cowboy." Robin invited Kate to help on the next day's shoot, and the rest, as they say, is history, despite her brother's advice. I began to admire Kate's sense of adventure. When I asked what inspired such an attitude, Kate shared a quote from a famous Australian woman. "Don't wait for the light to appear at the end of the tunnel," she declared. "Stride down there and light the thing yourself." How very thought-provoking was the statement. I wasn't going to reach the light without making some effort, and nobody was going to make the effort for me. What was the light at the end of my tunnel of obesity? Was it simply to become thinner? How much thinner? At what point in my weight loss effort could I stop and light the thing myself? I couldn't answer that yet, but I was a long way from the light and knew I'd better get started. When I asked if I could borrow some camping equipment, Robert and Kate offered not only the equipment, but also their land. The Wagon Gulch Ranch was at least 3,000 acres and was bordered by thousands of acres of public land controlled by the Bureau of Land Management. This was plenty of space for me to conduct my extraordinary experiment in the privacy I required. The preparations were now made, and the bears were waking up from their prolonged sleep. The end of chapter 3.